Sit up a little
As
bit.
Peggy Carr lay ill in a hospital intensive care unit, doctors were baffled.
Take a deep breath for me now.
Lab tests were all negative, but one of the doctors noticed a tiny clue. Her hair was falling out. It was a symptom of a very rare condition, one the doctor had never seen before. And if he was right, there was no known cure. Peggy Carr was a 41-year-old restaurant worker who had been married to her second husband, Pye, for the last 6 months. Peggy worked as a waitress at a drive-in restaurant and had 3 children from a previous marriage. Pye had 2 children and worked at a phosphate mine.
They seemed to be happy. My mom loved him more than anything. You know, he was just the light of her life. You know, he was it.
Peggy and Pye lived with their children in this house in the middle of an orange grove in central Florida. They all enjoyed the privacy that their secluded home provided.
Things at the beginning, you know, seemed just perfect. You know, he had a perfect home. He had, you know, I had my own bedroom. The girls had an apartment down the hill. He had a pool. We had 3-wheelers. Everything was perfect.
But soon after their marriage, Peggy began to question the long hours Pye was working at the mine.
He worked all the time. There were some questions about if he was really at work or if he was out.
One night when Pye said he was working late, Peggy drove out to the mine. On the day she returned, Pye left for a previously scheduled hunting trip. While he was away, Peggy became ill, complaining of an upset stomach and an intense burning sensation. When Pye returned home, he told the children he thought it was only a virus.
She was sick. She was very sick. She was laying in bed and she couldn't move. She kept complaining of her hands and her feet. She said she couldn't open her eyes. She was nauseated.
By the time Peggy was taken to the hospital, doctors noticed some weakness in both sides of her face. But when lab tests were negative and they couldn't diagnose her problem, Peggy was released.
The next day I went up to check on her and she was even worse. And I told Pye, I said, we need to take her to the hospital again because she's not getting any better. Well, he went to work.
The children drove her to the hospital once again. This time, one of the physicians who examined her noticed a tiny clue.
I noticed that her hair, simply raising her up off the pillow to listen to her back, quite a bit of her hair was left on the pillow.
Dr. Robert Van Hook and his colleagues thought it might be a poison, a very rare one, which doesn't show up in normal lab tests. A special test confirmed his suspicion. It was thallium poisoning. Thallium is a highly toxic metal, widely used as a pesticide before it was banned in the United States in 1972. Once inside the body, thallium attacks nerve endings and muscles, causing them to atrophy and die. In severe cases, it can cause delirium, paralysis, coma, even death. Tests revealed that Peggy had health officials gathered air and dust samples from inside the car's home and took more than 400 household items for laboratory analysis. Friends told police that the family received an anonymous threatening letter just a few months earlier. It was addressed to Pye Carr, misspelling Pye's name.
You and all your so-called family have 2 weeks to move out of Florida forever, or else you all die. This is no joke.
Police were suspicious of Pye Carr, not only because he failed to mention the threatening letter, but also because of his extramarital affair, the fact that he was away when Peggy first got sick, and his hesitation in taking Peggy to the hospital.
We dug very deeply at that point into Pye Carr's background, his friends, his family, his employer, went as far as to check bank accounts, bank records, insurance policies, anything that would show motivation on his part to poison his wife.
We thought, you know, Pye had something to do with it because the way he was acting.
Strong motivation is oftentimes a strong connection between the subject and the victim.
The profiling unit believed that the poisoner was highly intelligent, a white male in his mid-30s who resolves conflict without direct confrontation. He liked to read about murder, watch violent movies, and would then fantasize about committing murder.
It's more of a passive type of person, and it's more of a cowardly type of crime. You don't have to look the intended victim in the eye. It's very similar to a bomber, very similar type of personality.
The FBI suggested police question the neighbors because whoever poisoned the family knew their comings and goings and planted the soda without being seen. The Carr's only neighbor was Dr. Diana Carr, no relation to Peggy Carr, and her husband, George Trepal. Diana Carr had a master's degree in chemistry and graduated from medical school as an orthopedic surgeon. Her husband, George, was a freelance writer for a computer magazine. Both were highly intelligent and members of Mensa, an organization for individuals with IQs in the top 2% of the population. Police largest methamphetamine labs in the eastern United States. The drug agent who arrested Trepal called him the smartest chemist he had ever known. On March 3rd, 1989, 4 months after she was poisoned, Peggy Carr died. It was now a murder investigation. The Sheriff's Department assigned Special Agent Susan Gorick to the case. She was asked to go undercover to infiltrate the Mensa group to which George Trepal and Diana Carr belonged, an experience she vividly described in her best-selling book, Poison Mind. Under an assumed name and identity, Susan Gorick attended a Mensa murder mystery weekend which George and his wife Diana were hosting.
Before I went to the weekend, I spoke with the people up at the FBI Behavioral Science Unit to see if I could get some tips on the type of person or type of personality that I should develop if I was to meet George Trepal.
When Gorick arrived for the weekend, she received a copy of the murder scenarios George Trepal wrote for the participants. One was a murder by poisoning.
Few voodooists believe that they can be killed by psychic means, but no one doubts that he can be poisoned.
Among the clues given to the participants in written materials was another telling coincidence.
When a death threat appears on the doorstep, prudent people throw out all their food and watch what they eat. Most items on the doorstep are just a neighbor's way of saying, I don't like you, move or else.
Susan Gorick accomplished her mission that weekend when George Trepal befriended her.
He's very intelligent, maybe a little eccentric. A lot of people would call him odd, but because I spent so much time with him, I got to know him, and I did see a good side of him. I did see a nice personality, but I also saw a very evil side.
Oh yeah, somebody got poisoned next door.
In her undercover role, always under surveillance, Gorick met with Trepal on numerous occasions, hoping to gather evidence of his involvement in the poisonings. Their relationship led to an important break. A year after Peggy Carr's death, George and his wife Diana moved. They rented their old home to George's new friend, Susan Gorick. She moved in before all of the couple's belongings had been removed. And when she did, homicide detectives moved in with her.
I brought crime scene technicians and some other officers.
The caps were replaced so expertly that the markings couldn't be seen by the naked eye, and there were no fingerprints. Trepal waited until the neighbors left, then walked the soda to the Carr's back porch, making it appear that a family member had inadvertently left it there. It was hauntingly similar to the plot he would later write for the murder mystery weekend.
When a death threat appears on the doorstep, prudent people throw out all their food and watch what they eat. Most items on a doorstep are just a neighbor's way of saying, I don't like you, move or else.
The Carr family remembers drinking the soda at a family dinner when they had fried chicken. Pye Carr was drinking bourbon and added a splash of soda from one of the bottles. Pye's daughter, Tammy, was drinking diet soda and was the only family member who wasn't poisoned.
Yeah, Mom, if I wanted to get a job, can I get a job in
Peggy most likely ingested more soda than the others because she had the highest thallium levels. After she was hospitalized, her condition deteriorated. She slipped into a coma and died 4 months later. The two boys were also hospitalized, but recovered.
I would say that this whole case is science. This case was about being able to find the thallium in the washings of the empty bottles. When Coca-Cola did the experiments, that proof was extremely compelling. The science at the FBI lab, if you pick up those bottle caps, you can't possibly. I don't think with a magnifying glass can find those tool marks. And yet, they're so obvious in the blown-up pictures that the FBI did. Another thing very important about the science was George's knowledge of the science and the amount of literature we found in his house that backed it up.
When Trepal went on trial in 1991, the case against him was largely circumstantial. Trepal's criminal history as head chemist for an illegal methamphetamine lab. The fact that he used similar phraseology in an interview with the police that was used in the threatening letter. His authorship of the murder mystery storyline dealing to death.